Anand, we're making your argument for you here because there came dollars. So let's do a round of that. I mean, because this is in all seriousness, if dollars is such a great organizing principle for all sorts of other areas of life, why don't we get down and dirty and talk dollars and cloud computing? And if we track that, maybe we can get a greater sense of the trajectory of cloud computing than tracking almost anything else, including perhaps security. Maybe we just go with dollars. Let's try it.
Well, the main reason why people want to go to cloud is to reduce their TCO. And when they go onto the cloud, if the cloud doesn't dramatically cut down on their TCO, there's no point in going there. And almost half the TCO in the cloud space is power. And it's not, it's not the hardware, it's not the people, it's just power. And so I think there's a huge disruption happening because of cloud, and power is foremost in people's minds. And what this is doing is when there's a real need and a driver, people are willing to make big changes in their lives. And from where we see, for example, people are willing to change the kind of architectures they run on. Rather than going with, say, an x86 architecture, they're willing to go with the Tilera architecture or other architectures that can potentially offer a 10x advantage in dollars per in the TCO for many of these cloud applications.
John's dying to leave.
And it's absolutely true that dollars is a great motivator. In fact, known dollars not spent, right, is a great motivator. The other, for most of my customers, is reducing cycle times. They've got to get change to production faster. They've got to have more agile development, test, and delivery capability. And cloud is all about that. In fact, customers are spending more money in infrastructure at times in order to achieve that. So they're willing to spend money to get the money back in faster cycle times.
Right. So it's still money.
There is both a carrot and there's a carrot and a stick version.
Right.
And if you look at it that way, dollars does cut both ways.
That's what I'm saying. Charles?
I think that there's another cost-related barrier that after the security issues are solved is going to really hit particularly the enterprises. And that is, spinning up a server is really only a small part of the cost of getting an application on board. I've seen some interesting statistics. BMC publishes that the simplest applications typically take about 6 admin hours to get them up and running. Your typical business app is maybe 3 man-weeks worth of effort. Complex ones are quite a bit more. You have these enterprises that have already invested tremendous amounts of money in having their apps running today. How do they get those existing apps into the cloud in a cost-effective manner? You're not going to rebuild them from scratch. It just doesn't work. So there has to be a tool set that allows you to import things and export and move them around.
All right. Now, slightly different tack. I'm not going to put words in your mouth, so you may disagree with me on this. One of the things one tries with each Cloud Expo to do is designate the kind of inflection point that we reached at that given time, because we've got quite a large gap in between. 6 months in cloud time is like 6 years in the old days. So I want to ask you this. Private clouds, public clouds, hybrid clouds. Couldn't we make this the conference at which hybrid clouds was sort of nixed and we just start talking in some other way about the typology of running enterprise-grade IT? Is it just me that's it's beginning to scratch my ear, hybrid cloud? So I just want to know if there's any other ear scratchers among you, or it's just me. Jim's dying to leave.
Well,
how are those ears?
My ears are always being scratched, usually by Mr. Bishop, who we know well.
He's a great ear scratcher.
But that's the argument over the deployment model and definitions around how you want to run this is something that we could talk to for hours and is no fun at all. One of the points I wanted to make back, and it supports this move towards private enterprise inside my firewall clouds, not private in someone else's environment. That's to go back to this TCO model. One of the challenges we've seen with some of the large customers we've worked with is that simply deploying to the cloud really doesn't remove costs. It doesn't make anything cost less. In fact, it makes things cost more because they still have very large legacy data centers. They still have people. They haven't fired people because they put it out of the shop. They still, in many cases, are using legacy enterprise processes to deal with these things that are now in the cloud environment. So it's tough to make the numbers work when all you've really done is changed your procurement for a piece of hardware. I think that the discussions on the topology relate to the discussions on how somebody can actually recognize value in this environment. If you listen to an IBM, for instance, they've blatantly published papers that said the only way you can get an ROI is with a private cloud right now. Obviously, they have slightly slanted bias in that discussion, but there's a grain of salt there, and you have to weigh that with the other side of the equation that says there's fantastic operational benefits to going to a cloud. So time to market, being able to spin things up quickly, test dev environments that don't necessarily need to be perpetuated into the environment, DR. Sorry.
Right.
Yeah.
If I may jump in here, I think a lot of the focus so far has been on enterprises that have existing applications and they want to move to cloud to get a better ROI. I think we're missing the single biggest opportunity, which is the biggest benefit of cloud, which is elasticity. So if you look at startups, or that where startups just a few years ago, like the Facebooks and the Zyngas and the Tencents and the Baidus and the list goes on, they went. It wasn't exponential, but it was exponential with a massive factor. They went from 10 computers in a week to 100 the next week, 1,000 the week after. It was a massive exponential increase, and the elasticity would have been absolutely impossible with a private cloud. And it is that class of applications for which the cloud becomes an absolute must-have. And so whether enterprises get an ROI with cloud or not, I think we should not lose sight of these classes of applications, particularly web-serving clouds and so on, where elasticity is the key.
So that there is a class of application for that, and you named a great one. In fact, when some of those fad applications go away, the elasticity in the other direction helps even more, because I didn't actually make a CapEx investment that I'm now staging in entire data centers full of hardware, while the number of users showing up at my site is going down.
But one could argue it doesn't matter what happens on the downswing.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm supporting your argument, but then that is a relatively small class of applications. If you take the Fortune 500, that's not the typical problem.
When you say relatively small class of applications, do you mean by billions of users using it, or number of copies of applications deployed?
I mean the number of applications that enterprises actually build. The number of applications that need massive, immediate, infinite type of scalability, possibly, is a relatively small number compared to the number of people who are going to show up on Wells Fargo's online banking site, which they can predict within a percentage point or two next week, versus based on data from this week and several years before. So elasticity is a great value. I would not necessarily say it is the biggest, because it depends on the class of application and on who it is we're actually talking with. But getting back to your point, if there is increased cost in going to cloud, but there is tremendous value in doing so, you still do the math, whether you're rounding the way I learned or the way we learned a minute ago, and you still get there. You get a 1 year ROI in every case that I've been associated with, and it is fantastic. Don't avoid cloud because of cost.
Well, take it as Jason to leap in first. Then it's Terry, then it's going to be Charles. We've already gotten onto something.
I wanted to comment on the elasticity side of things too. And I agree that there's a small number of applications that require them. There's also a small number of applications that are actually written to be able to scale horizontally at all, right? So those are these legacy applications we're talking about that there is short-term, probably short to mid-term opportunity to keep moving those things into the cloud, right? Assuming you can make the ROI work for that, which I think you can, unless it's, some enterprises are so big that their economies of scale are better than the biggest service provider, right? Because they're just enormous. But there's plenty of companies out there that I think can make the math work. But go ahead.
Well, I want to put it back into the context of your question, Jeremy, and that is, this notion of hybrid cloud, and I want to expand the definition because I come from an enterprise background as well, and that's my core market. And the reality is, hybrid to them is not about private and public clouds somehow converging. It's how do they converge all their operations, and a lot of it is legacy. I mean, I don't have the gray hairs necessarily visible, but I was around when it was the prediction of the mainframes were going away, when we're going client server. Everyone remember that transition, it never really, and we're seeing the same thing again, cloud's gonna take, and the reality is the enterprise is still running mission critical applications, some of that code older than me. So these things are not going away, but there has to be a way for these guys, in some cases they can't migrate it to a cloud platform as much as they'd like to. They have to integrate it, however, and it's that integration now at an enterprise level that's going to have a renaissance that sees a true hybrid operations where there's going to be a taxonomy for the data, there's going to be a taxonomy for the application, there's going to be a taxonomy for the users, and that matrix will help determine the deployment strategy of the application going forward in that multi-tier classification of application operations. That's the hybrid that we're going to reach.
That's the definition of hybrid that we actually use internally. Is it's not this internal external. It's this. I have some stuff that runs on cloud, but I have stuff that has to be on hardware for some reason, and I want to hook that together.
Exactly. So I think the transition is from hybrid to an enterprise, back to an enterprise integration problem. So.
Charles.
Yeah, I agree. That's where we will wind up. I just want to point out, though, that the cost is kind of relative based upon who's looking at the cost. If you're a small organization and you don't have a substantial IT infrastructure built out, then a private cloud is a very costly thing to build out. Sure. A public cloud is then relatively easy to take because you don't have to make the investments in routers and firewalls and so on. It's very cost effective to move into the public cloud. But if you're a large organization, you've built that data center, you've got your redundant Libers out there and everything, and you've got some spare space. The incremental cost of adding a server versus putting one up in the cloud, it's a substantial savings to put up your server. Yeah. The cloud is much more expensive, the public clouds. However, if you're in that big organization, maybe it takes 2 months for your IT organization to add a new server. Okay, maybe you need 100 servers for scalability testing, and the mere thought of waiting 2 months to put them all up and then you don't need them again, it becomes a very complex decision. And what you're going to wind up with is, large organizations with private clouds. They're going to have dedicated servers. They're still going to need elasticity, and they're not going to want to have 3 different systems of management to manage each one of those things. Somebody's going to have to put the pieces together so that you can seamlessly move things around. I'm not sure who that's going to be yet.
No. Next question is dead simple. We want to nail it because, CTO panel, we've got to nail these things. So I want you to think latency for a moment. Having a discussion a couple of weeks ago, I posed the question, when can we really say that cloud computing, the way we're now talking about it and defining it, was in practice? I'm not so interested in the terminology. I really couldn't care who claimed the term, but I wondered who used it. And someone said, well, actually, I recall the time that Google went public on saying, yeah, we've got the data center here and a data center there, and with a little bit of load balancing and algorithms, we'll actually run the query in both places at once to return it to you in the fastest possible time. Could that possibly be the genesis of the kind of cloud computing we're talking about, where somebody said, it doesn't really matter where it's coming from, and yet it does? We think, this was another panel, we think sort of 2003. Could that be plausible?
I mean, if you're talking about running in active in multiple data centers with synchronizing data between those places, we were doing that in
that's a
the
very
late
years
90s. It was hard.
Come on, Chief Geek, take us through
You
it.
just described a very crude grid.
Yeah, I guess. So then put a date on it then.
I don't know, 98, 99, something around there.
Assuming
Maybe
it's
before
relevant,
Assuming it's relevant, yeah.
Assuming it's relevant to know.
Well, then the only other question was, so how much a role is latency still playing? To what extent are you all 6 thinking about that?
It's the eye of the beholder. Sorry, but it's the eye of the beholder. It depends on what your requirements are.
Yeah, I think it depends a lot on the
All right, so okay, let's
on
go
the
through it.
application.
I am a financial guy. You've got to be thinking about it for me, I hope.
So if you're a financial guy, there's a difference between a financial guy who's actually trying to do a pre-trade model and make a determination on a $10 million trade before he pulls the trigger, and I'm a financial guy who's looking for a global risk position.
No, I meant
latency is wildly different.
Or a trader where 1/10 of a second is going to cost
Yeah.
$1 million.
Yeah,
Well, I think what matters to a lot of people is people are browsing the web. It's the latency of a response. If I can ask a question and get something back before I can finish typing, a few seconds, that matters a lot. And I think the cloud does play a massive role, where you have a huge amount of compute resources. And if you have a lot of extra compute resources, And a lot of the latency is actually not in the network, not in where you put the data center, but it's in simply the amount of computation time and the queuing that takes place. So if you have a lot of cores, a lot of extra resources, and you have them waiting for to handle transactions, you can avoid all the queuing delays. You get a transaction in, boom, compute on it, ship the answer back. You can get the thing done in a second or two, and dramatically reduce the latency, which gets rid of geographical issues, queuing delays, and so on.
That's very application specific.
It is very
I was
application
gonna say,
specific.
I'm an old grid guy, so I'm going to bring this back to actually how we started the conversation. You have to understand your data.
Yeah.
You can say what you just said, and that works fine when there's very small data volumes entailed. It doesn't work so well even if you have a relatively small file like a 2 meg or even a 10 meg file that's required for a computation.
Nor is this really a cloud-specific discussion. I remember trying to build enterprise apps for those same traders when our connections were 56K at best, and when we had no ability to do quality of service over those connections, so we were screwed, pardon me. And we've now got another infrastructure in which we try to optimize delivery, reduce latency, right place and right size and scale. No duh. Are we ever going to get away from that? No. Is there a higher level of automation that cloud provides so that smart people can figure that out once and then roll it out? Yes. And I think that's where platform as a service will continue to help us do better and better with this. But have we invented a problem, latency with the cloud? No. Are we going to solve it by going to cloud? No.
Okay, that's a cool answer.
Well, Jeremy, and look at it at two sides. I mean, we were given the example of millions of users doing very, very small microtransactions when they're playing games and the like. On the other side of the coin, I'm working with enterprise customers trying to do public cloud adoption where they're literally trying to move tens of millions of contact records into the cloud. And it'll take them days just to physically load it, provided the network doesn't glitch, hiccup, whatever the case may be. So enterprise scale cloud adoption, again, it's in the eye of the beholder. What are you doing with the data? How are you managing it? How are you moving it? And then securing it. One customer was asking about encrypting the data and came to the conclusion it was wholly impractical. Where encryption might be an idea to secure the data when it's in the cloud, if I have to re-encrypt my data, tens of millions of records, I'll be down for a week. Every cycle of re-encryption, every time I cycle my keys. It's not practical. So that's where some of the adoption challenges are being faced today at the enterprise scale of the.
Yeah, we spend a lot of time having to deal with that. So moving data, a lot of times we just end up having them ship us a drive with the data on it and synchronizing, because you literally can't move 10 terabytes over the wire. It would just never finish. So that's going to continue to be a problem. There's no easy answers there.
Yeah, I don't think that the cloud itself is the answer or the problem. I think the cloud is going to be a tool, one more tool that a clever application designer can use in building applications. And what I expect to see is that just like it took a while for some application infrastructures to take hold and for people to start building on them, I think we're going to start seeing that, and we'll start seeing people build applications specifically for the cloud. Both private and public, and designed correctly.
Pardon me. And in fact, we've produced software that is even not, we have some infrastructure, some cloud infrastructure software, but we are an example of that, where our application is aware that it's running on cloud and knows to do some magic because of that. And I don't think that we'll be unique in that. There'll be lots of examples of that, and I hope there are more and more. If I could really quickly also mention, I hope that all of the conversation around security and data volume and latency doesn't cause us to not realize that development and test labs usually don't exhibit those problems. So for every production environment that is hosting that application, there are usually 3 to 7 pre-production environments built and maintained, constantly set up and torn down, constantly data reset, constantly configuration changed, that could benefit from cloud infrastructure without having the issues associated with moving a terabyte-sized database or the security issues usually associated with live production data. It's usually desensitized test data. So you can go a great distance in getting value from the cloud even before you go to production for use of the cloud.
And I didn't want to imply that it's not feasible to do that. It's just obviously takes planning and work. There's no easy button
you just
for
how
doing
custom and practice at the moment is
very fair.
Now here's the thing. Whenever you get to the end of a day and people are thinking cloud this, cloud that, and you're all wearing your corporate hats, and God bless you for that, because that's why you're here. But now tear them off, because you're all gentlemen, you're all scholars, I'm certain. So we need to leave the audience and the viewers with something a little bit more pregnant than just your company. So I don't know who wants to go first on this, but it comes like this. I often say to people like yourselves, exalted executives with rich and deep experience, so how long is, insert in angle brackets, the latest trend? How long is it going to last? And are you building the rest of your working life around it? And there are two camps. There are absolutely, this is the one, Jeremy, and I'm in for good. And then, and it happened to me this afternoon, and I'm going to tell you who it was, because I'm sure he won't mind, very splendid fellow from HP, who after enthusing me, and I'm a difficult man to enthuse, particularly at the end of the day, enthusing me about his passion and HP's passion for cloud computing and this strategy and that strategy. I asked him this question, he said, no, there'll be something else in 10 years. So, I'm not going to say who that was, and it didn't matter, but he was just being honest. So let's do a round of that. How important, you know, it's sort of this does IT matter thing. How important is cloud computing, Cloud Expo, in the great scheme of things in your lives, given our ages, et cetera, et cetera? Has it got 10 years in it? Or in 5 years, have I got to invent another bloody conference? Just, there's also a personal agenda here. No, so I don't know who'd like to go first on that one.
The implication that cloud is a fad, I think, is no.
It's not a fad.
Absolutely not. It's here to stay.
That's what I was
it's
sort of
It's
fishing
the right way
for,
of doing things. It's it's a natural evolution. For those of us who've been around long enough, it is a natural evolution. In some cases, it's history. Well, we're seeing that 20-year cycle, right? Where history's repeating itself, but it's been upgraded. This is history 2.0, right?
Like
so we're seeing a lot of patterns and strategies, for example, that came out of the mainframe days 20 and 30 years ago.
Partitions on?
Yeah, they're being reinvented. I mean, just start looking through the patents, guys, because there's a lot to harvest there.
So Terry's all in for the rest of his life. Jason's going to nip in first, then Jim.
No, just to follow that up, I've been in the service provider business since 95, 96, hosting, and what we have today, or what we're working on, and eventually we'll get to, is what we always wanted to build, and we just couldn't because the technology wasn't there. We tried to do auto provisioning and scaling and all that, but until we had really good hypervisors and multi-core processors and all these other technologies, it just wasn't feasible, and it was clunky. Now we're in this phase where, okay, now we can actually make this stuff work. So
your ship has come in.
It's around to stay.
You can begin. It's a beginning for you, right? It's
Absolutely.
Jim.
So I'm going to chuckle a little bit and use some of the arguments that were made a minute ago and say that the fact that it is repeating the past, I mean, to me indicates that we're going to go through this cycle once again. Now, I believe the tenets of see, I just made my own slip here, of cloud will be embedded in whatever goes forward. And again, the logical models, the abstractions, the patterns that will exist. But we will stop talking about cloud probably in less than 3 years.
Wow, okay.
So what? It'll still be there. It's an operational model. Whatever comes next, we'll build on top of it, just like has happened in the past.
Yeah, it's not saying anything negative about cloud. It's just saying. Anant.
I'll speak through both sides of my mouth, and I'll hide my affiliation, so, I'm truly speaking independently. I think that as far as the enterprise cloud is concerned, I think it will go away. I bought stock in Exodus. I bought stock in Navisite. For those of you who remember the mid-90s, and I lost my shirt on it. Yeah. And so, and cloud is, and for the enterprise level stuff, cloud is just another Exodus. Okay, and so we will, just the same way, we will see an Exodus from cloud for the enterprise. However, I'll speak from the other side of my mouth as well, which is that for applications where elasticity matters, where you have the Twitters and the game players and so on, where you have massive, massive volumes of players that go up and down and resources go up and down, where one single enterprise can often not support them all, I think cloud is here to stay. So I think it's for the web serving classes, games, and so on, it's here to stay. But for the enterprise, I think it's going to go the way of Exodus.
Interesting. 2 to go. I'm not sure what the consensus is going to be.
Yeah, I'll take a shot at that. I've heard several different things here that I agree with completely. The first is that cloud is nothing new. The fundamentals of cloud computing go back to many different things. The mainframes, grid computing. It's kind of a cross between the mainframe and a grid with the ability to handle non-mathematical types of applications. But I also agree that things are cyclical and that the number of cloud providers out there, public cloud providers out there, is absolutely insane right now. There's going to be another crash and burn. A lot of them are going to go away, and there's going to be a lot of consolidation. But 15 years from now, people will still be doing cloud-like things.
That's the key to it. Which leaves the last word to our chief geek.
Where I think I'll echo most of those sentiments. I think that cloud in maybe not 3 years, but certainly within 5, we won't bother to have a conference on, because it'll just be the way we do things. We don't think to go and buy on a project basis hardware and install it in some rack somewhere, hang it off the end of the cubes. We'll just know to provision it to begin with. We'll know that there's infrastructure behind us that we're not dealing with anymore, and that of course other folks are, but from the consumer's point of view, it's no longer even within our purview. And then it'll be so uninteresting yet necessary that we wouldn't bother going to a show for it.
So let it be known that Cloud Expo is doomed, and you heard it here first at the CTO Cloud Expo panel. Thank you so much.
Aren't you glad we were here?
I am so pleased. Thank you so much, not Terry Woloszyn, Charles Watt, come on, you're supposed to clap, Jason Lockhead, Jim Houghton, John Michelsen, and Anant Agarwal, and what fine fellows they all are.